Welcome, amigos, to another Midweek with Max. This is Rick coming live to you from Antarctica, joined by JCV, Jeremy, Max, our co-founder, and of course, Joshua. What the hell is going on? Sorry, I just got the weirdest notification. Why is Steam trying to update during Midweek with Max? Get out of here. Anyway, I digress. Thank you all for being here, and without further ado, let me turn it over to Max with our typical weekly update.
All right, awesome. Welcome everyone to another Midweek with Max. As far as weekly updates on the engineering side, we've been working a ton on both the MinerFi protocol, starting to get the smart contracts for that integrated with the backend daemon, as well as making more progress on the backend daemon threshold signature system and key resharing system. So that's all moving along and looking good. I've also been doing a lot of work on the ZK side. So last week, I think I mentioned on midweek, we had sort of a 0 to 1 moment with getting full end-to-end ZK proofs of the HVM Bitcoin indexer state transition. And so we've been working on adding more test cases to that and making that a more robust standalone daemon that can be run in different ways to make ZK proving easier, and some miscellaneous cleanup and bug fixes. So I've been working on that. We're probably going to get that open source sometime in the next few weeks here, so people can start. Are people able to hear me? Discord's not showing that I'm talking, but my microphone
Yes,
is.
we copy you. You're coming in.
You
Okay.
sound fantastic, sir.
Okay, cool. All right, it's just a Discord being Discord. Yeah, so we're probably going to be open sourcing that in the next few weeks. If people want to start playing around with it and taking a look at how we're approaching ZK provability. One of the other things is more of a background item, but something that I think is relevant from kind of a more macro strategy direction for how we're going to be doing ZK proving, is we're going to start using multiple ZK VM systems. And so probably not for the initial release of ZK provability for the Ethereum tunnel side. We'll probably go with just RISC-Zero's ZK VM for that. But one of the background items we're doing is also porting our existing ZK VM guest for the HBM state transition, and then in the future, the other components that comprise the full HBit VM proof system over to work with other production grade provers. The next one's going to be probably SB1. And then after that, there's a couple other options that we're looking at. There's some exciting ones that aren't quite in production yet, so we'll see where the timing for those land, stuff like Jolt. And there's also some other ZK provers that are over different curves or use different approaches, which is kind of nice because it gives you a little more proof diversity with, not trusting just one underlying technology behind it. The whole point of prover diversity, and this is something that there's been some conversations in the space around, but I think it's an important thing to highlight, is, we've seen both with RISC-Zero and SP1 that over the last, year, 18 months, there have been a couple different vulnerabilities, a missing constraint on a RISC-V opcode, or a missing check in a recursive verifier circuit or something like that. And all those are potentially ways that somebody could craft a malicious proof that could get accepted by the system. And so obviously there's, you want defense in depth, you want multiple layers of security and protection. And one of the best ways to protect against a bug in any one ZK VM implementation is to, of course, use multiple. And so if you have, that 2 of 3, for example, proof systems need to produce a valid proof for the state transition or the HVM precompile call or whatever it is that you're ZK proving. Then if there's a weird, obscure bug in one version of the ZK VM in one, very strange, obscure area, it's very unlikely that the exact same error is also present in another ZK VM. Like, I think the version that RISC-Zero had an issue with, there were a couple over the years, but one of the more recent ones was a under-constrained RISC-V opcode that didn't properly check all of the input registers that were read in the output register that was outputted to by the opcode. And so things like that, it's very unlikely that, say, SP1 would have the exact same issue with the exact same RISC-V opcode. And so even if an attacker did have potentially a, one missing constraint in one system, one missing constraint in another, it's still, A, it'd be a lot more complex to exploit it, but B, it'd be very unlikely they'd be able to get the exact same or a very, very similar proof that ends up proving the same state transition from the same, old state root to the new state root, valid in two systems, trying to manipulate two completely different missing constraints or something of that nature. So, and then with that, you get even more benefit if you're using multiple proof systems that use different underlying technologies. So obviously, RISC-0 and SP1 have a different architecture, but there's a lot of similarities between them. And then if you have, an entirely new proof system that's over, different curves and uses a different underlying commitment scheme, stuff like that, then you get even more of a sort of defense in layers approach that one of those systems is not going to have the same bug as another one of those systems. So that's kind of the macro guiding light, longer term vision for ZK provability. And also for HBit VM, obviously there's some limitations for exactly how far you can take that prover diversity, because at the end of the day, you're very constrained by obviously what you can actually validate in a Bitcoin script that you can fit into the BitVM style construction. And so with garbled circuits, you could potentially have multiple different independent Groth16 proofs verified, and you could do that somewhat efficiently. With the more BitVM2 style approach, that'd be theoretically possible, but it would increase the on-chain cost quite a bit potentially. And so at some point, you'd still be validating 3 different Stark proofs from 3 different proving systems in one proving system's Groth16 verifier, or a Groth16 Stark to Snark wrapper. And so you would still have the single verifier exposure on that final step with the Groth16 wrapper, but the majority of the complexity, you would have a multi-prover defense in depth type system for the actual Stark proofs, which is the very much more complicated and potentially, also new and cutting edge cryptography from all of these ZKVM systems. So that's just kind of a high level, thinking from the proof diversity perspective and the benefit of using multiple ZKVMs. And let's see. So I think those are the 2 major updates. So we had MinerFi and then ZK provability work. And again, look forward to open sourcing some of that HVM ZK stuff in the next few weeks for people to start poking at. We're also preparing for the Jovian hard fork activation. We are bundling some updates to the Hemi protocol along with that. They're not related to optimism style Jovian updates, but we're activating them at the same time so that it's just easier and there's one single upgrade for people to do, not 2 separate activation timestamps. One of the major changes in that, if for anyone who is using HVM or HBK, we are going to be, I don't want to use the word deprecating because they'll still be supported long term, but we are going to be introducing equivalent HVM precompile calls at addresses that use more bytes to uniquely identify themselves. So instead of a precompile being 0x45, it might be 0x45454545 or something, just so that we make sure we don't potentially collide with any future EVM precompiles. So the original thinking was, using the 0x40 space and above was probably safe, but as we saw with the Fusaka upgrade, Ethereum used the 0x100, so they actually moved into using 2 bytes in precompiles. And so adding more bytes to that, make sure that there's no future collisions. And so we'll be releasing a new version of Bitcoin Kit that calls the same underlying precompiles by functionality, but uses those longer, more unique precompile addresses. And anyone who is building around HVM will recommend that new applications deployed use those new higher byte precompile equivalent versions just to maximize future compatibility. And I think those are the main things. We also got the pop payouts v2 algorithm deployed on testnet last week, so that's been running. We have not seen a lot of testing in that, so we're going to be doing some testing ourselves on that this week, just to make sure everything's looking good. We also got the initial audit report back from our auditor for the pop payouts algorithm, so no interesting findings beyond just the standard economic assumptions we're making as part of the pop payouts algorithm. And so we're going to be getting a final report for that soon and pushing that up to the repo. Again, the repo for the pop payouts v2 algo is open source if anyone wants to look at it. And also look at the contract on chain on testnet. Let's see. I think that's pretty much everything from the engineering update side. We are also going to be doing the next VE Hemi rewards distribution this week. So we got final numbers. We're just getting internal sign off on the split going forward, and then we'll announce that with the on-chain transactions of converting the chain revenue into Hemi BTC and Hemi tokens, and then the distribution of those into the reward contract. So that is also coming before the end of the week, and I believe that is all the major updates on my side. JCV, I don't know if there's anything else on the engineering side you wanted to mention, and if not, since we do have Jeremy as a guest today, we'll throw it over to him for a quick marketing update.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything particularly fun that I'd have to add. So, Jeremy, go for it.
Well, I'm happy to be here, everybody. And by the way, it's lovely to see you all. Our marketing department has been kicking off the new year with a whole lot of fun stuff. We actually have a lot of interesting reports that we're looking into releasing very soon. We've released one of them more recently, and we're looking into all the different stuff that we've got going on in the ecosystem. Hemi is the filament between Ethereum and Bitcoin, and it is the place where Bitcoin becomes productive. So we're looking at ways to make it clear to people that this is the place that you want to grow your Bitcoin rather than have it sit idle in cold storage or on exchanges. We're also looking at getting more of our partnership announcements coming with some exciting new in-depth interviews with the founders of some of these protocols and how they interface with Hemi, talking about the technology. Close to releasing a new video with Jeff very soon, and I'm looking forward to having that out. And apologize if there's any lag. You can get mad at Spectrum for that. Otherwise, marketing doesn't have anything super juicy for me to give away, but I do look forward to giving you guys new updates in the future when we have them.
Thank you, sir. Let us progress with questions, starting with ecosystem. Max Mudakon asks, when will a new NFT marketplace launch on Hemi? Mint Park is down. I assume Miracle has the same question.
Not sure on the status of Mint Park. That'd be a question for the BD side. I know there is one in the pipeline. Not my area of expertise, so I know it is still in the pipeline, is coming, but I don't have a estimated date for it.
All right. It sounds like fellow Hamigo Alpha is working on something related to NFTs. I just saw that in the chat, so that's exciting. And I'm sure Alpha does have the builder role, so we can get some support in there. All right. Mudakon again asks, when will a DAO governance platform launch on Hemi?
We're targeting probably sometime before the end of Q1. So we're talking with a couple different governance platform providers and vetting how they would be able to integrate with the VE Hemi token structure. So without getting too in the weeds, there's a common interface and implementation pattern that people use for tokens that have voting and delegation called the ERC20 votes. And so that's kind of a bolt-on feature add-on to a lot of ERC20 tokens. And you can also use it with other token types, but it gets a little bit more complicated. The VE Hemi system uses NFTs, and so when you put in your ERC20 Hemi tokens, then you get out a NFT, an ERC721 that represents your position. And so because of that difference with the ERC20 to NFT conversion, it makes the delegation system a little more complicated. So the way that we had originally implemented it was we had a separate delegation contract that would record all of the delegations of the Hemi NFT positions to other EOAs or smart contract addresses, whoever you're delegating to. And so that contract does follow the ERC20 vote standard, but the problem is it's not baked into the underlying token itself. It's through this separate delegation contract. So it does all the stuff that platforms need for the tracking the delegation, but since it's in a different contract, it's not plug and play with implementing just a regular ERC20 that natively supports ERC20 votes in its own contract. And so we're working with it's a very similar model to what other VE tokens do, like VE Curve, for example. So we're talking with a couple different governance providers for the gap in anything that they need to do on their end to support that separate delegation system in the separate contract. So we should have something by end of Q1 up and running, but that's the delay on that side is that technical complexifier. So working on getting that resolved, and then longer term, we're going to be moving from using sort of a standard governance system to doing more on-chain provable governance. So the exact plan for that TBD, but it's something that's in the works on the engineering side from a at least ideation perspective of how we want to implement it. The goal being that instead of essentially trusting to some extent, obviously there's ways to audit things, but trusting to some extent a third-party vote, collection aggregation service, we'd be able to do that more on-chain and more provable. And so one of the architectures we could use for that potentially is a Hemi L3. So having a dedicated governance L3. There's other ways to do it sort of off-chain, but with on-chain settlement and economic alignment for vote aggregators using ZK or even a more simpler like signature aggregation scheme. So a few different ideas that we're exploring. The short-term solution is going to be what most other projects do with a sort of standard governance service that works with the ERC20 vote system, and then further out looking at doing a more on-chain native, more provable and transparent version of governance.
All right. Alex asks, on Binance's audit tab, the Hemi token shows as mintable. What causes this, and is it security related?
So not security related. That is why they have the check, but in Hemi's case, it's not a security thing. So basically, there's the way that the Hemi token is structured is there's a base contract on Ethereum, and then the version of the Hemi token that you see on the Hemi network is a tunneled version of it using the standard L2 mintable ERC20 that represents an equivalent L1 token. And then the version of the Hemi token that's on other chains like BNB, Optimism, Base, Arbitrum, and I'm forgetting one. There's one other chain that we support. Those use the layer 0 OFT standard. And so the way that that contract works is you basically lock up Hemi tokens on the L2 and they get locked in a contract. And then you have, so it's basically a lock and mint model. And then you have the OFT token on the remote chain, mint, quote unquote, out of thin air, the new Hemi tokens that are backed by the Hemi tokens locked back in the equivalent sender side contract on Hemi. And so it's always one-to-one, but if you go and you don't analyze the locked tokens in the Hemi L2 contract, then it looks like those tokens are minted just on the remote chain by the OFT contract itself. And so you need that because you need to be able to actually create the tokens so that they can circulate on the remote chain, but they're backed by those locked tokens. So that's why it's mintable. So Binance's contract analysis sees that, hey, there's a way that these tokens are mintable on the chain. That's because they are mintable by the OFT contract, but only one-to-one when they are backed by equivalent locked Hemi tokens on the Hemi L2 token locker side. And then the reverse is true. So when you take the tokens from one of the supported L2s that use the OFT standard for the Hemi token, then that token is burnt on that remote chain. And only after it's burnt are you allowed to get the equivalent number of locked tokens back on the Hemi L2 side. And then if you want to go all the way back to the source, then you could, of course, take those, burn those Hemi L2 tokens, and then redeem them for the underlying equivalent amount of the Ethereum-based L1 Hemi token contract. So that's why it shows up, is because the OFT standard, the way we're using it, requires that they be mintable, but they are one-to-one backed by, they're only mintable when they're one-to-one backed by the equivalent number of locked Hemi tokens on the Hemi L2 OFT token locker side.
All right, rock and roll. We have another question coming in from Alex. How do third-party bridges work with the Hemi token? Are Hemi tokens burned on Hemi, then reminted on the destination chain, or is a pool system with collateral used?
That's a good question, and the answer is it depends on the bridge. And so all of the sort of quote unquote official bridges, the ones that we've gone and either set up and deployed or sponsored the deployment and integration, those are all either the native tunnel bridge, obviously from Ethereum to Hemi, or the OFT system that I just described using layer 0 and that you can access through Stargate. So all of those use basically a lock and mint. So Ethereum to Hemi, you lock Hemi tokens in the tunnel portal contract on the L1, and then only when you've locked those tokens are you allowed to, or the protocol mints for you the equivalent amount of the L2 Hemi token. And then when you unwind that, you burn them on the L2, you redeem them back on the Ethereum base layer. And then, like I mentioned, the layer 0 version, same model, but from the Hemi L2 out to other L2s, So you lock the L2 representative Hemi token on the Hemi L2, and then you're able to mint it on the remote chains, eventually burn it, redeem it back, and pull those backing L2, Hemi L2 Hemi tokens out of the token locker. Third-party bridges. So if you see some of the third-party bridge systems that say let you go straight from, BNB to Ethereum, those sorts of systems are using liquidity providers. And so either liquidity providers or on-chain swaps are a mix of the two. And so what they're doing is either they have a LP who's willing to accept the Hemi token on, say, BNB, for example, and then send to you an equivalent amount minus fees of the Hemi token on, say, the Ethereum chain. Or they use a model where they use an intermediate token that they can move directly from, say, BNB to Ethereum with another protocol. And then they're using that to basically sell the Hemi tokens on the source chain, get that intermediate token, transfer that intermediate token to Ethereum, and then buy the Hemi token with that intermediate token. So for example, I'm not sure if any active bridges are doing this second model today. I know there's definitely ones doing the LP model. The second model would be, you want to move 1,000 Hemi tokens, you would, from BNB to Ethereum, you'd sell them on BNB, you'd get USDC or USDT or whatever. You would then, or the protocol on your behalf, moves those from BNB to Ethereum, and then on an Ethereum DEX will rebuy the equivalent amount of Hemi tokens and then distribute those to you. So from your perspective, you moved Hemi tokens from point A to point B. Under the hood, they're either going through a liquidity pool or they're going through a sale on a DEX on one side to that intermediate asset, transfer of that cross chain, and then repurchase on the other side. And that does also, the second model is not just good for having a good user experience, being able to move Hemi tokens around more easily, but it's also good for rebalancing markets. So if there's an arbitrage opportunity, you can use that same sort of infrastructure to arb out from one chain to another. So if Hemi tokens are trading, let's say, higher on BNB and lower on Ethereum, or obviously same thing works vice versa, then if you have Hemi tokens on BNB and you go through that sort of a sell, transfer, intermediate, rebuy, you're effectively doing an arbitrage transaction. So when there are arbitrage opportunities, having that sort of infrastructure in place does let people rebalance the markets and keep them efficient more easily instead of having to do all those steps themselves or write some sort of arbitrage bot that is able to calculate all these cross-chain routes for intermediate assets and do all the pricing and fee calculations manually. Instead, those can be done through basically existing third-party bridge infrastructure.
Right. Thank you for the explanation on that, sir. Aben asks, this is a very general question, but a good one. What are the future plans for the Hemi ecosystem?
There are a lot of things that could qualify as an answer to this. So I'll start on this is sort of ecosystem and sort of like the stuff powering ecosystem, but on the tech side, obviously the main sort of near-term future plans that we're talking about is ZK provability, ZK settlement of the canonical tunnel to Ethereum, which will increase both the security of the tunnel and also make tunnel withdrawals way faster. And then a lot of that technology plus some additional ZK proving stuff gets us to HBitVM, which is our Bitcoin side of the tunnel that secures Bitcoin in basically a ZK secured vault or many ZK secured vaults. As I mentioned before, technically it's not ZK, it's ZK with optimistic verification of a ZK proof, but essentially ZK. So those are sort of the technical underpinnings, and then the MinerFi system, what we're calling MinerFi, quote unquote, it's really a fast bridge and a DeFi router that we originally sort of created. The impetus for it was to support MinerFi applications, but can expand far beyond MinerFi. It can apply to integrations with things like centralized exchanges for automatic portfolio management on Hemi with your Bitcoin, easy onboarding and offboarding of Bitcoin into Hemi in general for different DeFi applications, even if you're not using the DeFi router infrastructure. And then also HBitVM, that's also going to be the primary way that people moving small amounts of Bitcoin on and off the network are going to do it, because HBitVM, basically the construction of each vault and the opening of each vault to get the underlying Bitcoin back out, both of those are expensive. They have a large on-chain footprint. BitVM2 obviously much bigger, BitVM3 style, BitVM3S with garbled circuits, smaller but still non-trivial, since the on-chain cost of HBitVM deposits and withdrawals is non-negligible. The fast bridge will be sort of a liquidity wrapper around the system where people moving larger amounts of Bitcoin in and out will use HBitVM directly, and then people who are moving smaller amounts will use this fast bridge that has a LP system of LPs providing Hemi BTC liquidity so that you're getting Hemi BTC that's backed by an HBitVM vault, but you don't have to actually have enough to create an HBitVM vault. Similar to, at least from a mechanical perspective, actually the token bridging system that we talked about that uses LPs, where you have a LP with tokens on the remote chain, they're willing to swap those effectively for the equivalent token on another chain. And so that can be used for smaller amounts with HBitVM. So those are the main tech items. I'm guessing this question's more about like third-party people building in the ecosystem. So another longer-term answer to this is Chain Builder. And so Chain Builder, again, is our L3 or tree of chains, basically architecture in the future that let people launch additional networks that sit on top of Hemi and settle to Hemi and ultimately can settle through Hemi to Bitcoin and Ethereum. So those L3s would have access to both the Bitcoin and the Ethereum side of the tunnel. They would have access to HVM precompiles for Bitcoin awareness. So the same Bitcoin-aware DeFi applications and infrastructure you can build on Hemi, you could also build those on any of the Hemi L3s. And of course, inheriting Bitcoin security and Bitcoin finality through proof of proof through the Hemi L2 as a security aggregation layer. And so there's sort of a couple directions for ecosystem. There's people who want to build things on the Hemi L2 today. And so we have a lot of partners in the pipeline. We're going to be putting together a more formal grants and bounty program. Timing on that TBD, but it is something that we're trying to get out here in the relatively near future for people who want to build brand new things, largely focused on HVM and Bitcoin orthogonal technologies and DeFi protocols. But then Chain Builder unlocks that second group of builders for the Hemi ecosystem, which is people who want to develop an application that either needs its own chain because it needs customization of features. Maybe they need to modify the virtual machine to support opcodes that are optimized for on-chain AI model inference, or maybe they need to tweak the economics, security, and speed trade-offs to make a very extremely high throughput chain to handle gaming transactions, or maybe they want a different sequencing mechanism, or they want to use a different DA system for either cost reasons, or maybe they're doing something on chain with large pieces of data that they need to store off chain, don't want to pay Ethereum DA prices for, and they're doing something unique with that. And so sort of the first wave is what we have today, which is the Hemi L2 working as it does today with HVM precompiles to build these new Bitcoin DeFi primitives on top of. And then the next step of that is enabling that custom L3 chain architecture for people to customize if they need, again, a dedicated chain for their DApp, or they need to make trade-offs or modifications, add features, whatever it is, to the chain base layer itself to support their application. And the goal of that is to be a very open modular architecture, so that when you look at sort of the landscape of interoperability protocols, the current state today is generally that you either have very tightly coupled, specifically interoperability between different chains. You usually have either a very tightly coupled system where all of the chains need to effectively use the same architecture, and maybe there's some parameters that those chains can tweak, but basically you only have this limited box in which you can modify things like, say, the gas limit of blocks, or when a particular EVM upgrade is activated, or what the sequencer model is to some limited extent. But either of those really closed, tight-knit ecosystems where essentially everyone's running the same code with maybe different config options, and they're able to interoperate between each other because each chain understands every other chain's protocol, because it's their own protocol, just potentially with slightly different configuration. And then there's the other end of the spectrum, which is a very generic approach to interoperability where none of the chains understand each other's protocols, but they use some sort of cross-chain messaging system that allows them to talk to each other as sort of a translation layer. And not just a translation layer in terms of, data is formatted one way and needs to be reformatted, but more in a sense of, although that's true for like, cross VM implementations from like, EVM to SVM or something, but for EVM chains that are not that tightly knit, where they don't natively understand all of each other's protocols, they need that sort of adapter layer to say, this is really the true canonical state of this remote chain, and therefore you can validate that this cross-chain message was actually sent from that chain in its current canonical state, not a fork of it or some other thing like that. And the most of the ways that currently works in the ecosystem, and I think this is going to be the year that a lot of that changes, both with stuff we're working on the Hemi side, but also just more generally in the ecosystem, where that moves from more of a trusted or semi-permission model, where you have maybe a bunch of, consortium of institutions or trusted signers or whatever who attest that a current remote chain is in a current state, to replacing that entirely with ZK proving systems. And so, beyond Hemi, just as sort of a ecosystem survey, you have things like AgLayer that are doing that, trying to be this aggregation layer that lives between a bunch of chains, and they can all, instead of having to have a many-to-many relationship where you have 100 chains you want to all talk to each other, and each one of them has a ZK verifier for each remote chain, and you get n squared complexity as you scale up the system. Something like an AgLayer lets a bunch of chains all essentially post ZK proofs of their own state to one central place that all of them know to look at, and then they can all trust that system. Again, trust in air quotes as in they've, the teams behind the chains have vetted the implementation and they trust the ZK proving system. They can trust that system, that any ZK proofs that get proven to that sort of, aggregation proving layer, they can trust that for cross-chain messages. So you still have point-to-point messaging, but it's validated through that common aggregation layer that all of those chains are looking at. And so one of the things on the Hemi side will be plugging into those sorts of systems like AgLayer or whatever similar systems get adopted by different parts of the ecosystem. And, it's not impossible to see a future where, there's one of those that dominates the EVM side, and then there's another version that dominates like cross VM communication, and there'll be probably some competition in there before the space eventually settles on one that's the best implementation, most efficient, whatever. So we'll be plugging into those as those evolve and settle on ones that are widely used in the ecosystem. But also for within Chain Builder, we're trying to build a similar architecture that lets all of these L3s communicate with the Hemi base layer and with each other in a way that doesn't require that tight coupling of code bases together, so that you could spin up a L3 that uses SVM. You could spin up an L3 that has its, you use proof of capacity for your consensus protocol, do whatever. And as long as you can ZK settle to this intermediate, chain builder aggregation layer, and obviously there's some optimizations we have with proof of proof for being able for each chain to understand each other's Bitcoin finality natively as part of that. So it's sort of a midpoint between complete, wild, wild west, do whatever you want as long as you ZK settle to this intermediate system, and the other end of the spectrum of everyone follows the same protocol, maybe with config changes. So sort of in the middle where you have common features between everything, which is proof of proof and Bitcoin finality. To some extent, for chains that choose to use it, the shared sequencing, shared DA system. And then the amount of those features that you use or don't use as an L3 determines how interoperable you are with the rest of the ecosystem. So whether you're able to do, near instant messaging for a shared sequencing, shared DA system, whether you're able to do fast messaging with shared Bitcoin finality information. So basically mutually assured finality or non-finality. And so you can do a lot of optimizations there for how fast messages can get passed cross-chain. Or if you choose to not use any of that and you don't use POP, you don't use shared sequencing, shared DA, you do your entirely own custom thing and you just settle to Ethereum like a completely custom rollup that just lives as an L3, then you'd be at the base layer of that interoperability. So it'd be slower, but any chains that choose to trust your ZK verification function in that sort of aggregation layer inside the chain builder Hemi ecosystem, you'd still be able to interoperate with the rest of the ecosystem just at a delay because you're not using those other features that can be used to optimize the cross-chain transaction throughput while still keeping a high level of security that you're not going to receive a message and process it, and then that message effectively gets reorged off the remote chain. So that's sort of the tech side of ecosystem. And then obviously there's actually attracting people to build in the ecosystem, attracting protocols, helping those protocols get users. And so that's a lot more of the, softer side of putting together the right incentive programs, putting together the right, developer grants and bounties, giving protocols, especially ones that are developing new stuff that's exclusive to the Hemi ecosystem, whether that be because they're using HVM or they're leveraging assets that are only on the Hemi side, like Hemi BTC, things of that nature, and being able to support those projects, again, help them with user-based growth, help them with all kinds of things from, security audits to active protocol monitoring to, marketing their protocols. All of those things is sort of a package for people building in the Hemi ecosystem.
Also, one bit I want to add with that. If you want to see, and I've said this before, so if I sound like a broken record, I don't care. If you want to see something in the Hemi ecosystem, build it, port it. We don't. We're not the ultimate gatekeepers. The networks are about who's in the network, who uses it. All of you are part of the network, so go and build the shit you want to see too. We will try to get as many things in it as we can, but there's only so many of us. So, add to the network. Make it the network you want. Don't just, not just the network we want.
And that is a perfect segue to remind everyone that the builder role and the beta tester role are actively available in the Hemi Discord. If I could get a link to that, Josh, if you have a second. We have one more question under ecosystem. Then we're going to pivot and switch to some questions that we missed from last week, as Alpha is reminding us so gently in chat. Our final ecosystem question from Mudakon: was the NFT versus LST locking system an intentional decision? Seems LSTs for fungibility are better. Fungibility? I know it's. Is it fung or funge? Either way.
Fungibility.
Oh, thank you, sir.
Yeah,
I
unfortunately, it has
like
nothing
your
to do with,
funkability better. Make it sound like it's a George Clinton thing, not a crypto thing.
or something to
Right.
do with the shiitake mushrooms in my fridge. NFT versus LST. So just to clarify the question, so the VE Hemi system, the current model is NFT. So you put in ERC20 Hemi tokens, which are fungible, which means that each token is equivalent and you can move them around. So dollars are fungible. If I give you $1, you don't care what the serial number on the dollar is, right? It's fungible. Whereas a NFT would be the equivalent of like the dollar bill being signed by Michael Jordan. It's no longer worth $1. It's now worth way more than $1, and it's not equivalent to any other dollar in the ecosystem. Kind of a bad fungibility example, but so NFTs are naturally non-fungible because each NFT represents a unique position in the system, and so when you lock your Hemi tokens, there's basically two dimensions to your locked position. There's the amount of tokens you locked, and then the time that it's locked for, and also that the time that it's locked for obviously changes over time as it unlocks. And so even two people who lock 100 tokens for 4 weeks, they're going to lock at slightly different times, and so those positions are still different because one of them is going to mature sooner than the others. And so from a fungibility perspective, there's really no way to have your cake and eat it too, where we could have the mechanic of locking up tokens for a user defined period of time and making them fungible. In the ecosystem, there are protocols that sort of attempt to work around this in some ways. So a good example would be looking at the Ethereum LSTs for Ethereum staking. So behind the scenes, something like restaked ETH is backed by Ethereum that is locked up in the Ethereum staking protocol for consensus purposes. So it is locked for a period of time, and that period of time is actually sort of unknown. Obviously, it starts when you actually initiate a withdrawal, and then depending on how many other people are in the withdrawal queue, it could be a year before you can pull your Ethereum out. And so there are projects that build kind of a wrapper around a non-fungibility system to make a fungible token, but ultimately those rely on sort of like a fractional reserve system in a way, where not everyone can go redeem their, RS ETH or whatever for native ETH today if they all wanted to. You can have things where there's, a portion of the underlying backing token is kept in liquid reserves so that it can facilitate, normal redemptions and deposits into the system and has some liquidity for that, kind of like a fractional reserve bank would. But if everyone goes and tries to withdraw their money all at once from a bank, you have issues. Same thing with those sorts of LST wrappers around non-fungible positions. So we decided at the protocol level, we basically give direct pass through to the actual economics and mechanics behind the scenes. So I guess two questions. One is the motivation. So why did we want a system that has that variable lockup? And the reason is because for incentive alignment, we want to use VE Hemi as part of economic security for the protocol. And for all these different parts of the protocol, we're decentralizing from being a sequencer to being a HBit VM covenant emulator and operator to providing liquidity and cross-chain, bridge systems that wrap around other bridge systems or the native tunnel, to the shared sequencing, shared DA system for chain builder, et cetera, et cetera. And so all of those benefit from not just having people lock up tokens for, X period of time, but being able to configure that so that people with smaller amount of tokens, but who lock them up for longer and are more economically aligned with the protocol's success and the ongoing security of the protocols that they're involved in, the longer of a lockup they have, the more vested they are in that. And so it makes sense to have these two dimensions of, you could be a very large holder who's a little more short term, you could be very small holders, very long term, and those two people could get essentially equivalent weight in the system because they're contributing to different parts of that security model. And so that's why we did the variable staking setup. It's also a well-grooved path in DeFi, so you have a lot of other projects that, use the vote escrow style system and have that variable locking. And then that's used for, for something like Curve being able to vote on how emissions are sent to incentivize different markets. Similar patterns you'll see in DeFi with other DeFi protocols using the vote escrow system. And so for Hemi, it's the same general idea, but applied to economic alignment with the protocol for securing all of these features that want to use VE Hemi as economic security. And then also, of course, on the governance side, if somebody has a few tokens, but they're in it for the long game, we want to give them, sort of adjusted voting weight versus somebody who has a lot of tokens, but they're in it for the very short term. And so having that, configurable locking time system supports that. And so fundamentally, there's no way to get fungibility on the base layer. People could build any sort of fungibility wrapper they want around VE Hemi positions. So you see this in other ecosystems with VE NFT style positions where you'll have a protocol that themselves is giving out non-fungible NFT positions or staked positions, but then you have a protocol that wraps around it, and basically the protocol from the on-chain perspective owns the non-fungible NFTs, but then users can swap shares and ownership of that protocol itself. So kind of like in the traditional finance world, you can have a company that, say, buys real estate, and the real estate is non-fungible. Houses are not equivalent to each other, right? But they have a portfolio of houses. Some of them are high-end, some of them are, cheaper houses. They're in different areas. They have different, risk profiles. One may be, at risk of getting hit by hurricanes, and another one is at risk of getting hit by snowstorms, like up in Rick's neighborhood. And so the point being that you can have
Too soon, Max. Too soon.
All right, we'll wait a week on the snow jokes. But you can have this vehicle that holds all these non-fungible positions, like real estate, for example. But then people can own fungible shares in that holding company. And so you can do a similar thing with an on-chain model where you can have a smart contract that people can deposit, Hemi tokens into. That protocol then creates the VE Hemi positions under the hood. It can have different rules for how it manages its inventory. So it can have, kind of like you could have, getting a little off the rails here, but a traditional finance company that has bonds of various maturities, right? So the shares of that company are still fungible, but they can have, 30% of their treasury in short-term bonds that are going to, expire and mature in 6 months, and then 20% in ones that mature in a year, and the other 50% in, 2 to 5 years or whatever. You could have a similar thing where you have a protocol that has, 30% of its positions in 6-month VE Hemi positions, and then it can, roll those as they're not needed, or as users want to withdraw liquidity from the system, it can let those mature and then redeem the tokens and give them to the people who want to pull their Hemi tokens out of that protocol. And then it could have, another 20% in 1 year VE Hemi positions, and so on and so forth. And so you can build fungibility wrappers, but they're complicated, and you don't have the user pass through to the underlying economics. You have to kind of synthesize it with that sort of a holding structure. So people do that for other protocols. People could do that for VE Hemi. It's totally permissionless. You could build a fungibility protocol today. And since VE Hemi positions are transferable, so despite not being fungible, you can still transfer them. You could even have a system where that sort of a holding contract would let you deposit your VE Hemi positions, and based on the position you're depositing versus the overall portfolio allocation, they would then mint you some number of shares of that protocol. And so you see these sorts of approaches with I always forget the number. I want to say it's ERC 4626 or 4526 volts, where basically users deposit assets. They can be multiple different types of assets, and then there's some internal logic inside of the vault system that decides how much those assets are worth to the vault, and then mints a corresponding amount of, quote unquote shares or tokens that represent ownership in that holding system. So short answer, we didn't do it directly because we want to keep the mechanics as simple as possible while getting the economic alignment we want. And then it's up to third parties if they want to build fungibility wrappers around them, and they can compete as to what the best version of that fungibility wrapper that the ecosystem wants actually is. And the answer may be some users really want a short-term fungible staking position that has lower yield but easier liquidity. Other users want a more, mixed portfolio or a very long-term heavy portfolio that has more yield, more voting power, but, longer times to maturity for actually pulling out the underlying Hemi tokens when they want to eventually redeem from the protocol. The other thing to mention, and then we'll move on to other questions. But the reason I bring this up is this is a cool thing that somebody in the Hemi ecosystem could go and build themselves that probably people in the Hemi ecosystem would use. Those protocols could also charge some sort of a management fee. So they could have, 10% of the revenue from the VE Hemi positions are, kept by the protocol or distributed to governance token holders of that protocol or whatever. And also, it would be a way to, as we start decentralizing parts of the protocol and VE Hemi positions are allowed to participate, it could morph into kind of a RS-ETH kind of a system where you could have operators who run the actual infrastructure. So they're the ones who, run a HBit VM covenant emulation daemon, or they run a sequencer node or whatever it is. And the protocol could basically delegate their portfolio of VE Hemi positions on these operators in the system. And so it'd let somebody who has, either a small amount of Hemi tokens, or maybe they have a lot of them, but they don't want to deal with running all this infrastructure, but they want to get the yield that their VE Hemi positions could get them if they were to run a sequencer or a covenant emulator or whatever. They can now benefit from getting a large portion of that potential yield through a protocol that manages restaking or delegating those positions to people who are willing to specialize in running the infrastructure. So you get sort of this nice separation of economic and technical duties, and it creates a better system for people to get involved with their economic collateral. Obviously, they're taking the risk that the operator behaves correctly and doesn't get slashed by the protocol, same as you have with an RS-ETH type system. But that is definitely something, if somebody's interested in building that in the Hemi ecosystem, we'd be happy to help from the technical side of kind of how that should look and how you interact with the Hemi contracts and sort of the future plans for delegations. You can prepare your architecture kind of accordingly to work with that delegation system to participate, again, in these decentralized aspects of the protocol, which are also additional yield sources for the Hemi positions. But basically, the short answer is that's how you could eventually get to a fungible type token around VE Hemi positions, is with that sort of liquidity wrapper. But the base protocol necessarily, due to the mechanics we need, cannot give you a fungible token directly.
All right.
So if you want to build that, reach out.
Yeah, please. And again, the builder role readily available. Okay. Before we move on to some questions from last week, Max, in the interest of time, could we just get a quick VBK overview? Because I have 3 questions in the hopper pertaining to it. I'm just going to fire them off, but maybe you can summarize it all just for the amount of questions we've had in chat. The questions are: have the VBK distribution economics been finalized yet? If fewer VBK wallets claim, will the total distribution be adjusted for additional allocation to the registered addresses? And how will the VBK distribution be handled if the initial distribution occurs before the cutoff date? Sorry to fling all that at you at once, but I felt like maybe we could surmise it in one quick VBK sandwich, if you will.
Yep, I think we can do it. If I miss any part, just remind me. But so distribution economics, not completely finalized yet, although we should have that finalized this week. We're just making sure that we do have all of the original team founder addresses properly marked off, and there's one edge case that we have to figure out how to handle from a third party that was holding some tokens on behalf of some users, and so we're trying to figure out how to handle that situation. But we should have an answer for that hopefully sometime this week or early next week at the latest. For the distribution mechanics, it's not a ratio distribution based on how many people actually claim. So it'll be the once the economics are finalized, the amount of tokens for the VBK position will be fixed. It won't be dependent on how many people in the VBK system actually claim. So it'll be, one VBK token gets you X number of tokens, regardless of whether you're the only person who claimed or whether every single person who owns VBK claims. And then the other question was about the cutoff date. So there's not currently a cutoff date. What we're going to do is do the distribution in multiple rounds. So anyone who's registered before the first, cutoff date, the first distribution date, will be included in the first batch. If you don't get in before the first batch, that's fine. You can register and you'll be part of the second batch, which will be the exact same economics, exact same conversion ratio. But you'll have to wait until the second distribution happens. And then at some point, obviously there will be an end to that where there's, the final distribution round and everyone has to get in before that. So there will eventually be a cutoff date, but that's pretty far in the future. And for now, it's basically just whether you're in the first distribution or the second one and have to wait a bit longer because you didn't register in time for the first wave of the distribution. I think that answered everything. Is there anything I missed in that?
I think that's a pretty good summation. The only thing would be, when would be the first distribution? That's a question that just popped up in chat.
Hopefully end of this week, as long as we can finalize the economics of that third-party complexifier case that we're trying to resolve.
Copy that. All right. Hope that shed some light for our VBK peeps. All right. Here is a question that was left over from last week that we didn't get to. Alpha asks, what is the difference between the current definition of AI and machine learning? I've always thought artificial intelligence as creating emotion and knowledge within a machine is not possible. Is what we call AI just machine learning?
In my opinion, collapses down to, what is the end output? Like, I don't think any sort of AI system ever will have an actual lived experience of the world. However, I'm sure there's a better way to frame that. Maybe if we make biological chips in the future that actually are just basically new animals that we invent, obviously that could be different. But as long as, AI algorithms are really just numbers moving around and switches flipping on a computer, it's basically just a simulation of what a human might do. And I think AI is even, it sort of seems like, and I'm by no means an expert on this, but just from kind of a interested in the field, keeping up with it, following it, especially from the LLM space and how it intersects with software development and things of that nature. So not looking at making AI that makes moral decisions for the world or anything like that, but essentially we're trying to mimic human behavior, and then we've kind of gotten to a point where it seems like a lot of the AI work is no longer mimicking human behavior, but it's trying to create a new sort of human augmentation coprocessor that thinks differently than a human, but can interface with humans and do things that a human can't, and humans can do things that the AI can't. And I see that as sort of the logical end game. But again, by no means an expert in AI, and I'm sure other people on the team have differing opinions on the current and potentially future trajectory of AI systems. But right now, yes, it's just bits moving around on a chip. That is it.
Yeah, this is one that I could talk about for a long damn time, especially get a couple drinks in me, and this could go on all day. But lot of philosophy of mind classes in college, back in college. But yeah, like Max has said, current AI, is machine learning was one technique for AI, and these LLMs, large language models, are statistical models. They're basically, if we feed enough things into a computer, can we teach it to statistically come up with what seems like a, good response for a given thing? Is that AI? Yes, it's a technique from AI. If you mean, is AI making an actual mind? Then no, it's pretty clear that modern AI, regardless of the fact that it is really damn impressive, is not making a mind. Is it possible to have an actual thinking machine? I don't know. I lean towards yes, but again, that's from the perspective of thinking materialism is very true, and that any mental state is equivalent to some physical state. Do we have computers that can do that? No. Are our current techniques the right way to go for that? I'd argue no, but at the same time, our current techniques make some pretty damn useful things. Is our LLMs a way to make sort of when they call it a general intelligence? Uh, I'd argue probably not, but I could be proven wrong, because LLMs have definitely done a lot better than what I expected of them. I come from it as thinking, LLMs are just a multidimensional improvement on Markov chains, which are pretty simple versions of very simple one-dimensional statistical versions of this. And I highly recommend you look up there's a Markov Garfield comic strip where someone had written software to generate text for Garfield comic strips based on the Garfield strips as the input learning set. And it's a very cool just sort of way to see how the simple version, one-dimensional versions of LLMs work. But, does it doesn't actually tell you what's possible, but it's a nice sort of mental model to think about how you get there. Did any of that answer any of the questions? Probably not, but hopefully someone found something a little interesting in that ramble.
I greatly enjoyed it. Yeah, that was incredible. I also think we should do a Hemi happy hour based on AI, because I'd like to get a few drinks into JCV and really let him go.
Oh boy.
So,
I would not say no to that. Just,
I
but me well enough to know I wouldn't say no to that. So
I know, I think the community would really enjoy it as well. I mean, we already have to set up the ZK proof gathering, so why don't we do one on AI too, and have a couple while we're at it? That could be fun.
Let me be very clear, the ZK proof one will be sober. The AI one, you guys can do
Yes.
whatever you want.
yes,
Yes, ZK proof will be very sober.
yes.
The AI one, though.
I think the old math joke about not drinking and driving, I think that very clearly fits with ZK stuff.
Yeah, I'll agree with that. But the AI one, let's go off the rails. All right. In the interest of time, we got a couple more questions, and everything else we're going to push to next week. So please bear with us, folks. My apologies. Follow up from Alpha. With RAM prices through the roof, do you think the AI bubble will ever pop, or do you think it's here to stay?
I think we covered this in a past one, so I'll just give a very quick take. And again, not a markets guy, not financial advice. I develop software and algorithms. That is what I'm good at. But everything from my perspective looks like every other bubble that we've seen. So there's been an exciting new tech item. It is real tech and it does solve real problems, but people misuse it in ways that don't make sense, and it takes a while for the market to figure that out. And we saw that with the dot-com bubble. We saw that with 3D printing. We saw that with, even blockchain. We had our 2017, 2018 moment where we had this really cool, really powerful technology called blockchain that could do all kinds of amazing decentralized finance and provable shared state between people for all kinds of interesting computational use cases. And we built those. People built Ethereum, people built tons of other versions of VMs and infrastructure and cross-chain interoperability protocols and DeFi protocols that were legitimately useful and did new things that weren't done before, solved problems that were issues for people before, revolutionized the global financial markets. And in the meantime, people were also trying to use the tech in ways that didn't make sense. And, some of those looking back are obvious, some of them at the time were obvious, but it takes a while for the market to figure that out. And you kind of have the three buckets of things that are going to live long term and make perfect sense, things that maybe make sense and are kind of unexpected use cases of the technology that a lot of people doubt and then actually do end up being useful and powerful and living for a long time. And then you have the bucket of things that maybe some of them were interesting ideas, but they just don't pan out for various reasons. Some of them are just absolutely bad uses of the technology, and it takes a while for that to actually get recognized by the market and priced in accordingly. And so you have the dot-com bubble burst, but we still have Cisco, right? And Cisco is way overvalued because they were seen as like the infrastructure play for this giant ecosystem of all of these things people are going to do on the internet. And then a lot of those things ended up not being interesting. Those collapsed. They no longer needed to buy more Cisco switches, et cetera, et cetera. But Cisco's still here and still powering tons of the backbone of the internet and still doing very well. And we saw the Amazons and Microsofts and Apples of the world explode and do very well and suffer during the correction as they do during markets, but then proceed to do very well because they were actually adding value to the ecosystem. How much for each of those companies is a matter of continuing debate, but in blockchain, same thing. We saw tons of tech come out of the early explosion that has withstood the test of time and makes sense, and people use it, and it solves problems in the real world. And we had a bunch of solutions that did not, and eventually those got recognized, priced out of the market. It causes a correction, but then the true technologies and projects and protocols and companies that are doing stuff that people actually do want and does solve problems, they may suffer a bit during the correction, but they survive it and eventually go on to continue to grow and innovate and expand. So I think AI is going to be the exact same thing, where there's tons of AI companies that are overvalued, and there's tons of actual legitimate cool use cases of AI that are going to survive any sort of market correction. And so will we see a correction? Financial advice, I think so. Is it going to be the end of AI? In my opinion, absolutely not. But don't take my word for it. If you want to know about ZK proofs and consensus protocols, yes. If you want to know about markets, I'm not the guy to listen to. I do see a couple other questions, and I know you have some on your list. I think we can bang through a couple of these really quickly.
Sounds good, sir.
So I see Luctatio asks, will the new pop pad algorithm be deployed to mainnet? We're targeting next week, the first week of February. We look like we're on target for that. I do want to see some more testing on testnets. Like I mentioned, we'll be doing some of our own testing there to make sure everything looks good. We did get back the audit report, still working on getting the finalized version, but all of the important stuff for that's done now. It's basically just clarifying some of the context in which it runs so they can put the final audit report together. So that's the easy part. So we should still be on track for first week of February, assuming all the testing on testnet goes well. If not the first week, then definitely by the second week of February. And that will also come with the existing pop payout, pop points, getting their equivalent Hemi token distributions as well. Then Japan 1012 asked about the September NPM supply chain attack on things like chalk and debug. And actually relevant to that, there was just, I forget I think it was in React, there was another vulnerability that just came out in the last 24-ish hours. So the question is, for NPM supply chain attack, stuff like wallet draining malware that's getting incorporated into UIs. For our UI in the Hemi portal, are we pinning dependencies by hash? Do you have runtime detection if the wallet connection gets hijacked? So we do have a lot of things that we've done on the dependency management side, enforced at a variety of layers. So a couple different aspects to that. And I think we've covered a lot of these in the past, so I'll quickly summarize. We are enforcing dependency pinning. We are improving that system. We're going to be migrating from NPM to PNPM, which lets you enforce more, what's the right word, expressive rules around dependency pinning. So being able to pin dependencies not just based on a particular version, but also being able to say, dependencies created in the last n days are not allowed unless they're manually overridden, things like that. So pinning dependencies, yes, and that's a system we're going to improve by moving from NPM to PNPM. Also, we don't have automated deployments, so even if a developer on our team did update a dependency of, say, the Hemi portal to a vulnerable dependency, there's checks and balances and what actually gets deployed to infrastructure, and there's humans involved in that process, multiple humans. So that's another layer of defense. We don't just, auto update dependencies and deploy new both UI front end web stuff and also back end, node infrastructure, things of that nature, without an approval process that makes sure that there's a reason that we're deploying this new thing. It's either to fix something or a feature, and that people have had time to manually look at any manual override dependency updates or anything anyone makes. So system that we're continually improving, but we do have a lot of stuff in place right now to protect against that. And again, like I mentioned, migrating to stuff like PNPM, we've already done that on some repos, and we're continuing to do things like that and other best practices. Monitoring, having automatic vulnerability reporting. So we have bots that basically scan our repositories and look at dependencies across both the backend and the front end components. And if there are any vulnerable packages found, we get alerted. Pull requests get automatically produced that update the dependencies to non-vulnerable versions or roll them back. So a lot of layers of security. It's the kind of thing you can always improve, and we are doing so, but there's already a lot of stuff we have in place to protect against that. Nothing is 100% secure, so as you're using the Hemi portal or any DeFi application, you should, as a user, still be following best practices. So that ranges from, checking the URL of every site that you're on, make sure it's actually the legitimate URL, vetting yourself. I'm not going to make a recommendation of which ones here to use, but there are plugins that can automatically detect a lot of malicious DeFi behavior and can automatically block it. So if a UI is compromised that you're using, either because it's a phishing site itself or the actual legitimate site got compromised by an attacker, then those sorts of tools are good at, they're not going to detect everything, but they're good at detecting a lot of the common patterns you'll see. Check transactions before you sign them to the extent that you can. Whenever possible, use hardware wallets or other similar security measures instead of having a hot wallet with your seed phrase or private key stored on your computer in a decrypted format somewhere. There's levels to that. We've done deep dives in the past on best practices. So none of this is a replacement for users practicing good security hygiene, but there are tons of things we're doing on our end to mitigate any of these sort of supply chain risks that we're seeing. Another question was about batch and proposer keys. And also I'll throw in the sequencer key there as well, because it's slightly different as far as what it does in the system, but sort of relevant. Asking about general security practices around those. So obviously we're not going to talk about the exact infrastructure that we use, because then it would open up to attacks that target a particular technology. We're using industry grade standard security practices for how we manage those keys. There's, I'm sure, improvements we could make to that we've been discussing as well, but we're using industry standard security practices for those. And then the second part of the question was, do you have runtime detection if the wallet connection? Oh wait, sorry, I missed a line. What is the blast radius of a keyword leak, and can you rotate them without halting the chain? So we do have monitoring for if there's misbehavior. We can step in with admin governance multi-sigs and pause various functions until we could recover and rotate the keys. Similar to most other L2s currently, there's not a in-protocol way to rotate the keys, so it would be an upgrade to the network to rotate the keys. that is something that we've discussed ourselves making as an update to the Optimism stack to allow in-protocol key rotation, and there's some ways to do that that are secure and still have the checks and balances of, Security Council, things like that. The longer-term solution to this is, of course, decentralizing all these components so that there is no key that does any permission thing on the network other than, maybe like a pause guardian security council with, third-party monitoring systems and security firms and stuff in case of, that there's a break in the underlying ZK cryptography that we're using or something like that. But in general, it's something that could be detected and mitigated mostly by on-chain actions and then a network update. And we do want to add in protocol rotation in the future, but it's not currently a feature that is supported in the way that we're using the Optimism stack today. But it is, definitely an item that we want to address in the future. And another relevant question, that one was also from Japan 1012, and one final one from him or her, Japan 12. What are your plans for expanding the bug bounty program and what is being audited? So bug bounty program, as we introduce new components, we're going to be expanding the bug bounty program to cover anything that's security critical to the protocol. So the next things you'll see added to it is going to be all the ZK proving code, ZK VM guest code, host operator code will be covered to a less extent because it's not security critical. It's more like uptime and liveness critical, but it'll also be covered because we obviously don't want any bugs that like delay generation of valid ZK proofs. But we'll be adding all of the security critical parts of all of the different ZK proving components to the bug bounty program as those are developed and open sourced and audited. So I'm not sure if we're one of the things some other projects have done that I like as a general pattern, but I'm not sure if we're going to do it this round for the ZK stuff. A lot of projects will do sort of an open-ended like community hackathon sort of thing around it before they actually get formal audits, or while they're in the progress of doing formal audits. We'll probably take the approach of doing audits first, and then only once a certain portion of the ZK proving system is audited, then we'd open it up to bug bounties. And then after the bug bounty program has been open for a period of time, then those parts would go into production. So it'd be get formal audits from firms, then have a period of sort of open exploration into the protocol, seeing if the audits missed anything, and then letting those systems go into production. So stay tuned for more info on that as we decide exactly how to roll out the kind of auditing versus public hackathon sort of timelines. But that'll be the next major component that we add. And then what is being audited? We talked about this in the past, but essentially all smart contracts that are critical to the protocol, all of those are audited. How much they're audited and how frequently they're audited depends on how frequently they change. Obviously, we don't re-audit things that have already been sufficiently audited if they're not changing, but also, how security critical they are to the protocol. So something like, for example, the POP payouts algorithm, we're getting one audit from a reputable firm because the risk of something going wrong with that is pretty minimal. It's, some people may not get the right payouts and we have to, update it to correctly pay out those missing payouts, or, someone's able to steal a small number of tokens that are, the liquidity in the payout contract versus things like, the Bitcoin tunnel or, obviously HBitVM, all of the components of HBitVM from the ZK provability side, and the like 5 different layers of ZK proving for all the different parts of the stack. And then the coordination contracts that'll live on Hemi, those are going to be heavily audited, and those are going to be audited by specialized firms in each area. So we're not just going to have some, smart contract specific auditing firm take a look and give a seal of approval on some ZK proving system. We're going to engage a firm or firms that specialize in ZK proving. For the MinerFi system, we're using a bunch of stuff with threshold signature schemes, and so we're going to engage an audit firm that has already audited a bunch of other threshold signature systems and found real vulnerabilities in edge cases of the underlying cryptography they're using. So depends on the component, depends on how big that component is, and obviously the risk of compromise to the protocol. And then for really complicated stuff like the upcoming HBitVM and MinerFi systems, those will be audited by different parts of it will be audited by different firms that specialize in that particular area. Okay, I think that's it for the rapid fire ones I wanted to do. Cool. I will hand it back to Rick for any other quick questions that we wanted to address, and we can do outros after running 20 minutes long, like seems to be the usual these days.
Yeah, it does. But that was incredible speed running. Holy shit. Well played, sir. Wow, that was a lot of questions. You get a half an inch of snow, and all of a sudden you can speed run at the end. Look at this.
Must be the cold.
Must be the cold. All right, one more quick one. Also from Japan 1012. Your VDP program doesn't seem to include smart contracts. Does your bug bounty include smart contracts?
I don't know. I don't think they're explicitly called out. I think we need to add them to the scope. If you do have an issue with, if you do find a vulnerability in any of the contracts, do report it, and we will consider it part of the scope. It depends on what smart contract. If it's something, I think the reason it's not currently in there is we had to put together a separation framework between upstream contracts from, say, like Optimism is the biggest example of this. That would not be part of our scope, but should be reported to Optimism upstream. So being able to differentiate that from the changes to those contracts, and then any custom contracts like Bitcoin Tunnel, the new pop payouts V2 algorithm. So I don't think we explicitly call them out, and we do need to do that. But if there is a vulnerability in any contracts, please do report it through the VDP, and we will consider it in scope if it's one of the critical contracts to the system. Obviously, if it's some thing in like Hemi hatchlings, that's different. But if it's any part of the core protocol, tunneling, bridging protocols, pop payouts, any of those core system contracts, those are in scope, and we would apply appropriate bounties to them. And we will get that updated with the proper separation and scoping between upstream stuff and our modifications to upstream contracts that would be in scope. I don't know, JCV, if you have any comments on that. I think we were discussing that last week or 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, that sounds. I don't. You know what? Last weekend feels like a long time ago. There was snow, so I don't remember when we discussed it. But yes, that does sound about right. And definitely, we don't want Hemi hatchling bugs. Are probably not interesting. I cannot stress that enough.
Our VDP is also open scope, so we accept any reports for anything related to Hemi. If it is valid, we'll still triage it.
And a lot of VDP programs work that way, where they'll have things that are explicitly in scope, and then other things that are not explicitly called out. But if there's a bug in something that is relevant to the security of the protocol, it's still implicitly in scope after team triage. So we will make that more explicit for the contracts. That's a good thing to call out. But yeah, like Joshua said, that open-ended scope essentially covers anything that is critical to the protocol. But we will make that better and give appropriate smart contract scoping guidelines.
Yeah, VDP is essentially a see something, say something. So we will accept any reports that are related to Hemi. We'll still look at them. Bug bounty is more scoped, but that's just usually how those kinds of programs operate.
All right. I hope to have a very robust community update for everyone in the next Midweek with Max. This week I'll be meeting with JCV and Joshua to kind of talk the scope of the community projects we have to look for the future and the present. And hopefully we'll have some really juicy updates for you guys next week. No pressure, JCV. None at all. Sorry to put you on the spot there, bud. And we'll be completely sober when we have this conversation. Unless we're talking about AI, in which case the gloves are off. Couple quick updates. Of course, there is a Rumble session happening in the Here server. And if you look in the chat and also ecosystem projects and the builder channel, there is the Hemi games launched by the good folks at the Here token. So you can play some blockchain games right on the Hemi network. And they're looking for testers and all sorts of folks for feedback. So please feel free to talk to Alex, talk to Alpha, and get in some Here games. I believe that is it. Outside. Oh, you know what? There is one more thing, and I apologize. There have been several questions with February approaching. Do we have an update regarding the OG role that anyone can share?
We are still targeting February, but I don't think we have a more detailed date beyond that.
Totally fair, sir. All right. So, in conclusion, I'd like to thank all the amigos for joining us today. Our moderation team, who's kicking ass and keeping the trains running on time and keeping the scammers out. My God, there's been a lot of them lately. It's crazy. And they all seem really dumb. I feel like the scammers are getting dumber. I don't know if you guys all feel that way, but it seems like they're getting dumber and more desperate, which is kind of funny. Regardless, thank you all for joining us. Thank you to our co-founder Max Sanchez. Thank you to JCV Joshua and our good friend Jeremy from our marketing team and our, I believe, head of content. So thank you all so much for joining. I am going to turn it over to Max and team for outros, and we will see you all next week.
All right, awesome. Thanks everyone for joining us for another Midweek with Max. Hopefully we'll see you all again next week. And yeah, stay tuned for the upcoming ZK deep dive breakout session, maybe an unhinged AI one. We'll see how that evolves. And I think that is pretty much everything. So if you're interested in more of the engineering side of the ZK stuff, especially if that's an area that you've already done work on and are interested in potentially reviewing ZK proving guest program implementations, things of that nature. We will be having code for that open sourced in the relatively near future for people to start playing around with. And also, I think maybe we'll fold this into the no pun intended into the ZK discussion, but also doing another. If there's any HBit VM related questions, we'll also include that in the ZK session. So it'll be anything ZK proving related, and then anything kind of building on that HBit VM related. Now that people have had some more time to read through the white paper, and we made some revisions to clarify some parts that were previously confusing. And so yeah, stay tuned for those. Stay tuned for the VE Hemi rewards distribution that should be happening before the end of this week. VBK stuff also coming soon. And with that, we will see you all next week.
Take care, all. Hemi strong. See you in Discord, amigos. And spread the word of Hemi on Twitter, X, LinkedIn, YouTube, and subscribe to our newsletter. And don't forget the Hemi Community Collection is always available at our store link. Okay, that's my shilling for the week. Thanks, thanks all. We'll see you next time. Oh, that was not cringe, Alpha. You're cringe. Get out of here. Sorry. Okay. Take care, all. Bye.
Oh man. All right. Cheers.
All right, bye-bye.